Hello and welcome back to Cherie Elizabeth Talk Sports. I am Cherie Louise Turner, the host and producer of Strides Forward, and I am here with my friend Elizabeth Emery of the podcast Hear Her Sports. And how are you doing this week, Elizabeth?
I am doing really well, and my news for the day, or what I've been thinking about over the past several weeks actually, is the poster behind me. And if you notice, this is a different poster. For the last couple weeks, it was a poster of Jesse Diggins, and it was a poster that I got for free at the American Birkenbinder when we were there. And I love it. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool to sort of switch up the posters every week for our little chats? And so I went on this quest to find a poster, and wow, 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 wow. I just, oh my goodness. So it's like every other thing that we talk about with women in sports. It's just, like I went in so innocently, like I would love a poster of some female athletes and thinking I would just click on eBay and find something. Well, so what I found was a variety of things. One was like just gross stuff. We don't even have to go into it. You all can imagine what it was under the guise of sports. But even beyond that, like just the lack of posters about women sports was, it was sort of interesting. Like it hadn't occurred to me that if, say, I type in cycling posters, that all of them would be of men.
Right.
I mean, it was fascinating in a way. And like I've said about media coverage, there were plenty of opportunities for women to be included. So I understand if you have a poster about Greg LeMond, that poster is going to be about a man, obviously. But if you have a poster about the world championships,
Right.
it doesn't have to be with only men. It could be men and women, or it could be 50% of the time it could be about men, and 50% of the time it could be about women. But that's not what it is. Every single event poster, world championships, Olympics,
Whoa.
all that stuff, even local events, local marathons, New York City Marathon, all men.
Really?
All,
That's
yes.
very surprising to me, I gotta say. I mean, in the worst way.
I had hoped even to find 4%, and I did not find 4%.
Wow.
So then the other category that I thought, okay, here's an opportunity to have women on the poster would be brands, like shoes or Trek or, whatever. And again, it was not 100% men, but I would say it was 99% men.
Wow.
And
Wow.
yeah, yeah. And to sort of confirm what I had found, I thought, okay, I am going to type in cycling posters. And this was last night. And again, this is on eBay. And so I looked at everything and it confirmed everything. There was the gross stuff. There was all the event posters that were all men. There were the brands that were all men. And I did not find one woman poster. I then went into some other sports. I can't remember what I did. And I found, oh, in triathlon. So this was interesting. So cycling tends to be very traditional, very male centric. So I thought, okay, let me try a poster about sort of a newer sport like triathlon. So I typed in triathlon, and I did in fact find a few that showed women and men together. It was for an event. It might have been the World Championships. And so I did that. But then there were some other sports that I thought maybe would have showed women, and they didn't. And then I really loved it when there were posters about gymnastic events and they showed a man, or there were posters about field hockey and they showed a man. And I was like, what?
You'd be like, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it was really frustrating. And then again, to mirror everything we've discussed about sports media, if I wanted to find posters with women on them, for example, this one, I had to type in really specific stuff. I already had to know a ton of information. I had to do the research. I had to find the information. And so that's frustrating too. Like just think if you're a kid or you don't know that much about
Mhm.
cycling, for example, and you want to find a poster for your room, it looks like only men do cycling. So that's super frustrating.
Yeah.
And before I forget, I want to say who this is. This is Gabriella Dorio, and she won the 1500 meter Olympic race in LA in 1984. She was a 23 times Italian champion. And so that's pretty exciting. I'm really happy to have this poster.
That's super cool, but
yeah.
boy, your findings are super awful.
They are awful.
I mean, I knew it was bad, and we had talked about this a little bit, but yeah, I had no idea. And the thing that immediately strikes me is who looks for posters, and you brought it up already, is it's young people.
Yeah.
And so it's just, well, maybe it's a business opportunity there, Elizabeth.
Are we going to get into posters?
I don't know. Somebody ought to. Like, here we're serving up a great business opportunity for somebody, and maybe us. Who knows?
Right.
So my news, of course, is that I went to the Masters National Championships for indoor track, and I was really happy to have experienced it. I knew going in that I was going to be outmatched. I didn't have super high expectations for myself. I really was going in to have the experience and to be okay with just having the experience and knowing that I was going to be outmatched. And I did those things. I was super nervous going in, and more nervous than I think I gave myself credit for, because I absolutely crashed after my second event on Sunday. I was just absolutely exhausted. And I think it was just all of the nervousness and just everything that comes with racing. And then on top of it, doing something new. And my second event I went to all by myself. So I was, a little nervous just to be there on my own. But so there are a few takeaways. One is, I mean, it's very exciting to have just done it and get to experience Run at the Armory, which is a track where there have been some really, really impressive performances. And it's a very famous track where a lot of important things have gone on. And it's absolutely beautiful. There are these amazing warm-up areas that you can go to downstairs below the track. And
oh, wow.
I mean, the whole thing is just, it's a beautiful setup. And I, kind of learned there are a lot of rules to follow in track racing that you don't have to follow, say, in road races. And so I learned all of that. And then above and beyond anything, it was very special to get to compete with women who are my own age. That is really cool.
For sure, yeah.
And also just to see the quality of the racing is just like the people who show up and are competitive they're so good. And so it makes me excited, because I think, I would love to try and be competitive with these women once I kind of get a little more experience under my belt and focus in a little bit more on what I want to excel at. There's something to aim for. And I mean, there are women that are just so fast all the way up into, like, I don't know, well through their 60s, and there were people in their 70s. I mean, it was incredible. So yeah, it was cool. And the other thing is that the competitive atmosphere there, while people are very, they're very serious and they're very good, they're also just really nice. And there just was, I did not feel at all any air of it feeling like elite in any way, or there just wasn't that same vibe that I've had at other competitions with younger people. I don't know how else to say it. And these are athletes that, some of them have been at this for decades, and they're so good at what they do. And so maybe even the times are slower than they were running maybe 20 years ago, but they have worlds of experience and know-how, and I'm sure they train incredibly hard. And I don't know, just the whole thing just was really exciting. I don't know.
You reminded me, we talk a lot about competition and, what we like and don't like. You reminded me that one of the things I have liked about competing is sort of figuring out how to manage those nerves, because it's a real thing. And I think it's possible to get too comfortable and not be nervous at all, and then be like, whatever, and we know we
Yeah.
don't feel that way, but then be so nervous, and I've done this a lot, so nervous that I make myself sick, which
Hmm.
is not helpful.
No. Well, and finding that balance. And I mean, I figure I will always kind of struggle with that because, yeah, you never want to get complacent
Right.
and be like, oh, I'll be fine with whatever, because
Yeah.
that's not true.
Right.
First and foremost. Yeah. So trying to find that place where you're like, I'm confident and I'm engaged, but I'm not freaking out, and like, find that nice balance. Um, yeah, one of the other things I'm very happy to say that I did was that I didn't beat myself up. And I didn't do as well in the 800 as I would have liked. And at first I was pretty disappointed, and then I was like, okay, like, let's just take a step back. you know like, what is it going to help me to beat myself up? First of all, not it's not going to help at all. And just like, well, let's use it as a learning opportunity.
Right.
you know it is what it is. How could it have been better? And just kind of going back and seeing what worked and what didn't work. And but yeah, but in the event itself, I was actually also very I don't know, like, I gave it everything I had, and I really felt that way. I was like, the one thing I want to do is just absolutely give it all that I have, and I did. And I have to be really happy with the fact that even though it wasn't exactly what I had hoped it could be, I feel like I did everything I could have to make it the best thing possible in
You
that
can't
moment on
you
that
can't
day.
ask for more than that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there were no miracles, but I thought that that was a good step forward because I tend to be very hard on myself. So
Yeah.
I was happy about that. So
Cool.
yeah, yeah. So moving on, we're going to talk about one of the episodes from my show, Strides Forward, and it's my most current full episode. And it's on a woman named Kathy Unschneider, and on the topic of masters racing. She has been an incredible masters racer. She started racing when she was 40. She has been very competitive for many years. She's actually not running right now, but she has been a competitive track runner for many, many years. And she's also a coach, and she's developed a whole coaching style and goal achievement method called Move. And she's also been an author. And among a few books that she's written and many, many articles about masters running, she wrote a book called High Performance in Midlife and Beyond. And it's a collection of stories of women athletes who are masters runners. And so I'm going to ask you to start us off on this. And what were your impressions of Kathy's story?
Well, I loved it. I mean, of course I loved it because it's talking about my age bracket or moving, she's older than I am, but thinking
Yeah.
about competing as an older athlete and sort of how to manage that. And I feel like I'm sort of moving into the zone of, you know, it's not just about training anymore. It's remaining healthy and fit and not injured. And I think that's a huge part of it. And she really talked about that. And she also talked about how, you know, she's gone in and out of injury. And just because you're injured doesn't mean that that's for good. And because I'm injured and my knee is struggling a little bit these days, it was just really nice to hear and be reminded that, okay, this is not forever. Because I think we've talked about how I tend to globalize, like my knee is bad. Oh, it's going to be bad forever. No, like you have to do things, but it will get better. And so I think that's super important.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't know what about the episode reminded me of this too is just how I started running. This was again, but way back, and I hadn't been doing much work, and my knees were bad then too. And I would be sitting on the porch, and I would watch old people like shuffle by, and I was like, if they can shuffle by, I gotta like suck it up, get rid of my pride, and get out there. And if all it is a shuffle, that's better than sitting here on the porch.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Any way forward.
Right, right. And it did. Like that was just the start, and it got way better. And I ended up doing some pretty speedy times, and then I got injured again. you know,
But yeah, I one of the things that stuck with me is that toward the end she says something about, like, there's always a new starting line.
yeah,
And mentions this woman that she knew, who I think was like in her 70s, and uh and it's like, oh, and then she went and set some course records, and it's like there's always something to go after. And I think part of my process, and what I liked about some of the things that she had to say, is that it's not necessarily about chasing like a world record of an open record. It's like, no, you can go after these masters records, and just as long as you're always going after your best. And that I really I really like that sentiment of just doing your own best too, and not it like maybe you're going after masters records, and it's you're kind of competing against other people, but sort of within your arena of what you could possibly do. Like obviously I'm past the point of being competitive with a 25-year-old, but that's fine. And I think that really used to bother me, that it's like with age, there's just sort of this irrefutable truth that it's like, well, you're not going to be competitive ever again in this open realm.
Right.
But it doesn't matter. Like, do the best with what you have. And yeah, and I really like that idea of just like, well, just find the starting line that works for you and where you can be competitive and get the most out of yourself.
Right.
So, yeah.
I also have to remember along those same lines that, I am not living the same lifestyle I lived when I was racing full time.
Right.
That is an exclusive Looney Tunes lifestyle. You are not doing anything else. Yeah. Every single moment is focused on being as fast as you can. And even if I did that today, no, I would never be competitive with that age group, but I would be way faster than I am now.
Yeah, and I do appreciate, she did talk about the fact that like masters runners have lives.
Right.
And you have to navigate around that. And I've thought about that too, where it's just like, well, and I tend to frame it as like, well, how serious do I want to be? And I've tried to get away from that, like serious versus not serious, because I don't want my life to be ruled by my sport. So I think it's really important to find that happy medium. Right. And like, how much time do you want to devote, and what's the nice balance where you're going to get something out of it that you're satisfied with without maybe devoting your whole life to it and making it a priority above and beyond everything else.
Right.
Yeah. So
it was a lovely episode, and she seemed really fun. I wanted to hang out.
I know. And that it's like, maybe I want her to be my coach.
Yeah.
We'll see. So moving on to our media section, the main part of our media section is about science and research that goes into athletic performance. And so what we're going to be focusing on is an article that came out in the International Journal of Sport Nutrition and Exercise Metabolism, and it came out in January of 2022. And it is called Methodology Review, a protocol to audit the representation of female athletes in sports science and sports medicine research. It is a mouthful. But basically what it is a group of researchers came up with an auditing tool to look at the research that's been done on athletes and suss out what is really applicable to women and what isn't. And they have these protocols that they are suggesting that people use to do these audits.
And this is, just to interrupt, this is because so many studies have been done, mostly on men. So it sounded to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounded to me like they want to start off by looking at what's already happened.
Yes.
And figure out what information is already existing from those studies, and then decide what else needs to be studied. Is that
right? Yeah. So it's a way of looking at the research on a particular topic in the sports science and sports medicine research, and looking at what really applies to women athletes and what doesn't. And they have these different ways of looking at the studies that have been done to decide what information can be pulled out that is specific to women and where there are gaps. So part of why they wanted to do this is that it is it is a better way of quantifying where there are big gaps in the research and helping people, maybe funnel their research into these areas that we don't have a lot of good information on female athletes. And yes, and this is because like we don't have a lot of studies that focus exclusively on women. That was a very obvious one. They go through in this paper, they do go through like why this is important, like why we need this. It's like because there are a lot of women competing, why we are where we are today, and also kind of pointing out where we are today. So looking at some of the reviews of the research that have been out there and putting some statistics to like how many men were involved, how many women were involved. Um, and well, one thing I'm going to back up and say is there were some categories that they said people had to look at to make this audit. And so I will just briefly talk about what those categories are. So it is the audit includes considering who was included in the study, men and women, how many, the caliber of the athlete that was included in the study, did it factor in menstruation? And this was one of the big key factors in these, is talking about, where women were in their cycle. Are they menstruating? Are they not menstruating? So really factoring that in. The theme of the research, so what their topic of study was, the sample size, and then the study impact, which I thought was interesting. Like, where was it published? How much of an impact would this study have made? So most of the paper goes into the details of why the audit is the way it is and how scientists will do that. We are not scientists, so we're not going to get into that.
Right. And the audit is not done. This is just a study to show that they're going to start doing this audit. Right, correct.
Well, this is so people can go do audits.
Right, exactly.
So it's a framework that they're providing. And so this describes, why they've done it and how to do it. Yes, there are a lot of very small details.
Yes. It seems to me like they're trying to streamline. It seems to me two things. They're trying to streamline this process. Like they're saying, yes, okay, not enough research has been done on women that is applicable to women and helpful to women. Not only is it not helpful, but often it has been harmful.
Right.
So they want to streamline this process to show where the gaps are, as you said, where the good stuff is, and I think also just to show how bad it is. I think that's sort of an undercurrent of what they're wanting to do.
Yeah, and that was part of the reason I wanted to talk about this, because some of the language that's especially in their introduction and their summary, they used language that I think was very intentional. And I thought that they were very respectful, but also really made a point. And there are a few quotes that I want to read. And the first of which is, females have historically been excluded from this type of research. They call it SSSM, which is the sports science and sports medicine research. Women have been excluded from this research, particularly because their physiological intricacy necessitates more complex study designs, longer research times, and additional costs. So they're sort of a little bit giving previous researchers, I think, a little, I don't want to say a pass, but I think they're trying to be respectful. But I also think that pointing it out in this way sort of brings up the point that it's just like, well, so what?
Right.
Like here are all these excuses that you've made, but the reality is that the research just hasn't covered women well. And one of the interesting things that they bring up in the study that I wasn't aware of is that they mention that the 70-kilogram man has been considered, and this is a quote, considered a sufficient proxy in this research for a woman. It's like, well, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So I think you're right. There were just some nods to, I think, sort of respectfully talking about why the research isn't there in a way, by way of talking about why it should be there.
Right. I couldn't help but think of Sam Moore, who I spoke to on Hear Her Sports. And one of the things, and again, I'm not a scientist, so I don't really, this is a question I have, I don't have the answer, is I wonder if we're using a model created by men for studying men. And instead of, just substituting women in these very similarly designed studies, if we think of a whole new way of doing things. And that's why I thought of Sam Moore, because she decided, okay, the way that training has been done is designed for men by men, and I am going to come up with a way that is designed by me, a woman, for women. And I'm just wondering, maybe that's what we need to do, because the truth is, having a period is complicated. Yes. And I kept on thinking, like, how the hell are you going to do studies that sort of takes all that variability into account? And I just keep on thinking there has to be a way, but whoever figures it out is really going to have to bend their mind to come up with a way to do that. I mean, I just think about myself, no month was the same. Like every month was different. And, like, who knows why? I don't know why. And so I'm just curious about what will come out of this.
And I was thinking about the same thing. Is I do have a little bit of empathy for researchers. Because, yeah, that sounds really complicated, but science is complicated. Was sort of the other place where my thoughts landed. Was that that shouldn't be an excuse. That should be an opportunity. As frustrating as it might be.
Right. And we are also now in 2022, and the computers can do all sorts of stuff. So, like if it's designed properly, maybe the computer can do all the, aggregating and whatnot.
Yeah, data crunching. And I just think, well, the only way we're going to know how to do these studies in ways that are impactful and helpful is by starting to do them and find out where we're making mistakes, how to streamline things. And so if the idea is just that we keep not doing it because it's too complicated, well, then we're never going to get there. Right. So, it did give me this moment of pause of just sort of like, oh, it's so expensive. And the other thing that the researcher or the authors of this paper brought up was that, oh, well, women didn't seem to volunteer as much to be researched or to participate in these studies. And I thought, well, this sounds an awful lot like people trying to diversify, say, a panel or who they talk to as a source for their article in a newspaper. It's like, well, maybe if you're going to the same pool of people to get your subjects, that's the problem. I can't let people off. I just won't let them off the hook with this kind of thinking, because it's like, there are plenty of women athletes out there. Go find them. That's your job.
I want to get a DEXA scan. I'm putting my hand up for the old people DEXA scan study.
Yeah. And going back to something you said earlier, pointing out how bad it is, I was interested to see, because they did cite a couple of reviews of articles. There'd been these big reviews of articles and who that had been brought into the research. And at first, it doesn't look horrifying, because the number of women in all of the studies, and most of these are mixed gender studies, was sort of in the high 30s or low 40s, which I'm like, that's not terrible. Now, when you look at studies that were only done on women, then the numbers are horrible. It's like 4% to 13%, or, they're just very bad. And the men's numbers, of course, are larger. But one thing that really stuck out to me, and I'm going to read this again, is it says, across the SSSM topics, the bias against female participants was most striking in studies investigating strategies to enhance athletic performance. Only 3% of all participants were women. So that was a zinger to me. So it's really the kind of high performance. And I could only venture a guess at where women are more prevalent, but I don't think it's worth getting into any of that. But just to say that, we need to study women more, and we know that to be true. So, yeah.
On sort of a counter topic, you also had another article to read that was in
Women's Running.
Women's Running, right?
Yeah.
And I did have a little moment of, I guess that, because I'm just worried about overcomplicating things where it doesn't need to be complicated, which again goes to again, goes to thinking about Sam Moore, but this is a quote.
And I'm going to interrupt you just
Yeah.
to say also, so this is an article from Women's Running. It's by Erin Strout, who has written on running for many, many years. It came out in February of 2022, and the title of the article is FASTR, which is an acronym. It's FASTR. FASTR seeks to close the research gap for female athletes, leading to longer, healthier careers. And FASTR is a newly formed entity out of Stanford University. So yeah, just to preface what quote you're gonna read us.
Right. Okay. So I'll tell my thoughts after reading the quote, but here it is. Some, though certainly not all, of that malpractice. And when they said malpractice, they were talking about abusive coaching practices. So some, not all, of that malpractice is due to the lack of knowledge about how to keep young female athletes healthy and performing their best. And that made me worried about overcomplicating things instead of common sense. I mean, the abuse that was happening to younger athletes that we've all been aware of recently is not because of lack of studies.
Right.
It's because these guys are assholes and are doing terrible things. And, you don't need any study to tell somebody with common sense that you don't weigh young girls in front of everybody and then abuse them.
Right. Yeah. And, it's interesting because I pulled that same quote. I was like, oh, I know what you're about to read because I'm looking at it too.
Oh, okay. I love that we're on the same page.
Yeah. And I had the same reaction, and especially because what they get into in this article is a lot of what FASTR is doing to start with, which I think is a wonderful thing, is they're trying to educate, especially high school athletes, seems to be their first target audience. They're trying to educate them about the female athlete triad, also called Red S. We've talked about it before. So I think that that's a very great thing. I did also have a little bit of frustration with this article because it only mentioned the female athlete triad. And that's a real sore spot for me, because if you do not also add that it is called Red S, I think that's just a big problem, because the female athlete triad only refers to 3 aspects of this larger condition that we now call Red S, to encompass the complexities of this problem that so many young athletes, especially girls, but also boys, and then also athletes of all ages, can run into. And it's just basically about not nourishing yourself well enough. Right. So I'm happy to see that they're going after this. But, another thing that came up for me reading this particular article is that it's like, well, it's because of, tradition and, and we need to educate the young athletes, but also somebody said along the way, but also coaches and parents. And my feeling about this is another one of these, like, you need someone at the top to make this change today. Yeah. And it's like, I appreciate all of these efforts, and I'm going to go a little bit off of this article in particular, because it really hit a nerve with, like, if there is a coach, man, woman, whatever, who is working with young women with any young athletes, but women in particular, actually at any age, and they do not have a firm grip on what Red S is, on not body shaming their athletes, they should not be employed. And that has got to change, because this nonsense of telling athletes to lose weight and putting them in precarious positions is 100% unacceptable. Like, we don't need more research on this to know that this is harming athletes. There's just way too much of it out there, and it's been out there for way too long. And so this was part of where I was a little bit frustrated by, like, this is because we don't have the research, and because that's not true. We've got plenty of research to very clearly point to the fact that undernourishing yourself is incredibly harmful, especially to young athletes who are developing.
So and we also have plenty of research on how to eat well.
absolutely.
It sounds it sounds often that the coaches do not have nutrition training. And
Right.
so all of the information that they're giving their athletes is based on some like myth that they've come up with or have absorbed from society.
Yeah. Yeah. And somehow we're still operating under this, like, well, it's traditional thinking, so somehow it's okay. It's like, no.
Right.
Like, we just it's I mean, this is really they're damaging people's bodies for like the long term. This is 100% unacceptable.
Yeah.
And I understand professional athletics is really hard on bodies, but there are ways to mitigate those challenges. So that's that's my rant.
Yeah, and but it's also different. It's a different hard on bodies.
Yes.
You know, like if you're working yourself really hard, yes, it's not healthy often, but it's not under fueling because you have to be thin or something.
Right. And I think about like your interview with Afrique, who is the Irish rower who went to the Olympics. And, she talked about in great detail just how much they ate and like a lot. And that's such a huge part of why they won medals.
Yeah.
Like that directly contributed to them being better athletes.
Right.
And that's just got to be the messaging.
I think there's a huge misunderstanding of what women actually eat. Other than the salad eating models, I think most people don't realize what somebody who's active consumes
and needs to consume.
Right. Correct.
Yeah. To be their best.
Right.
Like all of this is under the guise of being your best. Right. And if being your best means having better nutrition, then that's what we should be doing.
Right. And better nutrition, just to go back to hammer the point, it's a lot of volume. You're eating a lot of food.
Yeah, especially endurance athletes, but really all athletes. So so I think I've ranted about that enough.
I'm sure we'll do it again in another episode.
Yes, but I did want to bring that up because I do think that what they're doing, their intentions with FASTR are very good. They have some really, really good people involved in this program. So I was excited to see its existence, and it did just start in January. So I mean, it's a very, very new program.
Right. And I'm excited about the videos that they're making with influencers.
Yes.
Marketed towards younger athletes. It sounded like high school girls mostly. And that to me is really going to be great. I mean, if they're done well, and it sounds like it will, and it's backed up by science and all that. I think that will make a big difference.
Yeah, I think it will be very helpful. And they also have researchers on their staff who are dedicated to researching women athletes at Stanford. So, top-notch research and a concerted effort to focus on high performance athletes, or, athletes who are women. So that was very exciting. And coupling that with our auditing system, where we're going to now be able to see, much more clearly the gaps in really good quality research about women, it will, bringing it back to women in sports media, it will give us more data and more information about how we can talk about women and the information that we can share with, the larger audience of how to keep being a better athlete. So
sounds good.
Yeah, I think we've covered it, Elizabeth.
I think we're done.
All right. We've done it again. Well, thank you so much for joining us this week. I am Cherie Louise Turner of Strides Forward, and
I am Elizabeth Emery from Hear Her Sports podcast.
All right, we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.